Well, good morning, everyone and viewers, and welcome to another edition of our PBALC live streams. October, among other things, is also Dyslexia Awareness Month, and today we welcome Samantha Vanderjeen.
Vara the Rajan.
Thank you. Of the Dallas branch of the International Dyslexia Association. Thank you so much, and we're so happy to have you today, Samantha.
Thanks for having me, Alba. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and tell us a little bit about the organization that you serve on.
Sure. So I am in private practice for myself. I provide dyslexia therapy right now virtually to students, and I also do evaluations for dyslexia and dysgraphia privately. Before this, I worked for a local independent school district as an evaluator, as a dyslexia interventionist. I've done roles such as ESL coordinator, reading interventionist, ESL teacher. And so my background is kind of all about reading and sort of the studying of learning languages and reading. And I got involved with the Dallas IDA, the International Dyslexia Association, a couple years ago, and the Dallas IDA is basically a resource hub for people, whether it's a parent that needs more resources or needs to be directed somewhere to find support for their child. Or right now, we get a lot of questions from adult learners who think they're dyslexic and they're now an adult and they haven't had any type of support or formal evaluation. And they're always kind of looking for where can they get an evaluation at an affordable cost, and it doesn't really exist, to be honest. So maybe that's something we need to be working towards right now. And people wanting support for how do I get accommodations in the workplace, or how do I help my child with this. And so we're kind of seen as a resource or a hub, and we feed into the national International Dyslexia Association, that's also a great resource and hub for parents and adult learners and so on.
And Samantha, are there several dyslexia associations across Texas, or is Dallas really the only hub?
There are several. So I'm aware of Houston, Austin, and then, and when I say Houston, Austin, and Dallas, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the city or the territory. For Dallas, we actually feed into several zip codes where we support people in parts of Arkansas and just kind of unexpected regions. I think we include a little bit of Oklahoma in our area. So really the term Dallas is sort of misleading, and we should be something more broad, but yeah. So there's several different chapters, there's a Colorado, there's Portland, all over. There are regional chapters for the International Dyslexia Association.
And the specific Dallas branch is all pretty much board and volunteer led, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So we have a very strong president and vice president who put in a lot of their time, where you'd think it's a part-time job almost. Or maybe even a full-time job. And it's all a volunteer board of directors. And we're able to pay an organization to do our bookkeeping, and get a little support through that, and which is wonderful. They're so helpful, but it is solely volunteers. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just wanted to make that clear so that people know it's like, wait, when we call, just remember it's volunteer led.
Yeah. So give us a few days or a week to call you back sometimes. Yeah. So, and it's interesting. A lot of our volunteers are full-time working professionals, whether it's private practice for yourself, like I do, or they're a dyslexia interventionist in one of the ISDs here locally, or they might even work for another, like a organization or a corporation, and really have nothing to do with dyslexia, or they might have a child that has dyslexia, and that's kind of how they got involved with us.
Okay. So yeah, just wanted to point that out. So if you do reach out to the association, just have a little bit of patience and they will return your call.
Thank you.
And I know you mentioned right before we went live that the association also offers scholarships. So can you talk about the scholarships and what those scholarships do?
Yeah, so we do offer scholarships. The application is on our website. If you Google Dallas International Dyslexia Association or Dallas IDA, you should be able to find our website. And the application is available on the website. But it's to provide dyslexia therapy. And typically it could probably do small group or one-on-one, like private dyslexia therapy. And it is for adults and children. I think just recently we awarded one of our first adults with the scholarship, which was really exciting because that's been such a need, is to get more support for adults with dyslexia. And so it might look like 1 or 2 days a week you're able to get your therapy paid for if you're able to win that scholarship. And I can't remember the exact terms, if it's like for the year or 2 years, or the entirety of the dyslexia program, but it's definitely a great option for folks to look into if they're looking for that support and if they can truly make a time commitment with a therapist. I know we were discussing that Permian Basin is nowhere near Dallas, and so how would an adult be able to navigate therapy? Would you have to commute to Dallas? And the way I see it working is if someone were to get that scholarship through the Dallas IDA or even any of the other chapters for the regional IDA chapters, virtual therapy is always an option, especially now with COVID and during a pandemic. I know I mentioned I'm in private practice for myself, and I've moved my private practice completely virtual just because there's been so many instances where you're seeing your clients or your students in person, and then the Delta variant becomes a big issue or concern. And I have a little one at home, a little infant, so we're extra conscious about COVID precautions. And so my entire practice is virtual right now, and it still works. It's a little different than doing it in person. Just, same thing, like just teaching or learning in person can be different than a virtual mode. But I could just kind of foresee an adult located in the Permian Basin being able to find a virtual dyslexia therapist if they were able to get that scholarship from one of the branches, or even the International Dyslexia Association may have scholarship funds available to adults.
And just to remind all of our viewers, we do put any information that Samantha will share with us, Dallas Branch Dyslexia Association will put their website and everything in the comments after the live, so you can refer back to it and I didn't catch what Samantha said. So let's dig into what is dyslexia. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of misconceptions and unknowns about what dyslexia is.
Yeah, so I think the best way to kind of describe what dyslexia is for me to share the definition of dyslexia from the 2018 the TEA Texas Education Agency Handbook. And what TEA says is dyslexia is a disorder of constitutional origin manifested by a difficulty in learning to read, write, or spell despite conventional instruction, adequate intelligence, and sociocultural opportunity. And they kind of go into better detail in the handbook with a definition from the International Dyslexia Association. And they outline dyslexia as a specific learning disability that's neurobiological in origin. So you're born with it. Um, Although you could also experience it after trauma, so that's another type of dyslexia. But it's characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition, and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. And you don't necessarily have to have all of those areas that you're struggling with. It could just be one or the other, as far as fluent word recognition or accurate word recognition, and then poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. So what that means is, even though you've received instruction, or you've been in a school system and you're receiving the appropriate type of education, you're still struggling. But what it would look like is it's unexpected. So you would have a strength in some area. Maybe it's mathematics, maybe it's creativity, maybe it's athleticism, but you're going to have a strength that kind of is up here. If we're looking at numbers, you're higher up here with your strength, and then you're still struggling down here with your other areas. So like your math is really high or average, you're doing well at learning math, but then your fluent word recognition and your spelling and your reading decoding abilities are lower. So they're like, it should be kind of on par with each other if we're talking about math and reading abilities, and it's not when we're talking about dyslexia. There's a level of unexpectedness there. You have to have a strength. And so some secondary consequences that are inclusive of the definition of dyslexia would be problems with reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. And so just some of the primary reading and spelling characteristics of dyslexia would be difficulty reading words in isolation, difficulty accurately decoding unfamiliar words, difficulty with oral reading. So maybe it's slow, inaccurate, or labored without prosody. And then also difficulty with spelling. So those are just some common characteristics that you'll see with dyslexia.
And a lot of people often say, people with dyslexia, when they see words on a page, it's like scrambled in their brain. Did they see
Yeah. Yep.
cow?
That's kind of a common thing you'll hear. Mm-hmm.
So what causes dyslexia? Now you said you're born with it.
Yeah, so it's this phonological component of language that, like the root of it, the cause of it is having difficulty with those areas of phonological awareness, or phonological memory and rapid naming. And those are the areas that you struggle with that impact the secondary characteristics, like the word ID, the spelling, the fluency, the reading comprehension, and sometimes even written expression. So really, it's that phonological awareness that one would struggle with. And it's kind of, I guess the best way to explain it is like you're typically born with it, although it could result from trauma, I've learned recently. But a lot of times it's hereditary. So a lot of times there is a family connection, like your grandpa had difficulty reading, or your grandmother had difficulty with spelling. And just because like certain generations maybe haven't had as much awareness as what dyslexia is, except for the current generation now that's in school. They wouldn't necessarily have an identification for dyslexia, but you might have heard things like, oh, my grandpa couldn't read, or my grandpa couldn't write. In maybe it was in Spanish and English because they were bilingual, and you'd see difficulty in both of the languages. And in kind of different ways, but you'd see difficulty in both languages.
Okay. And so that leads us to how can someone detect dyslexia symptoms? Is it, I know I read somewhere, if you have a hard time reading clocks or things like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Or like a lot, my husband does this one a lot. He does not know right from left. And that's just like one of those kind of common things you'll hear about. One of many, really. Or just like word retrieval is another one where you're like, oh, what is that thing? I'm trying to tell you, Alba, I'm trying to describe this thing to you, but I can't remember that word. What do I call that thing? Like that the word is in my mind. I know what it is, but I just can't get that word retrieved and tell you what it is. That's another common symptom or characteristic of dyslexia. And what I like to do is direct adults to screeners. There's a screener on the International Dyslexia Association website that's geared for adults. And so that might just be something that's just kind of like a quick thing to go over and learn about yourself, just to kind of see, do I fit these characteristics at all? And sometimes it needs to just be one of those characteristics or two of them, not the entire list even. I have in the handbook, the TEA handbook, the post-secondary behaviors that are problematic with dyslexia typically are inclusive of difficulty pronouncing names of people and places or parts of words, difficulty remembering names of people and places, difficulty with word retrieval, difficulty with spoken vocabulary, difficulty completing the reading demands for multiple course requirements, difficulty with note taking, difficulty with written production, and difficulty remembering sequences. So, like mathematical or scientific formulas. And so that's post secondary. So, that's like a good kind of checkpoint for adults to go through. It does look really different if you're looking at characteristics of maybe like a kindergarten student versus a 12th grade student. Just, given their amount of schooling and their age and their background knowledge. But those are just a few kind of areas to be aware of as far as kind of characteristics for a post-secondary learner.
And typically most ISDs, K through 12 ISDs, do have dyslexia specialists or some kind of specialist, and you will be screened through K through 12. But we're seeing here at the Literacy Center that a lot of adults weren't screened when they were in school. And so they want to know, where can they receive if they think they might have a learning disability like dyslexia. Where do you recommend that they get kind of screening? I know you mentioned before we went live that it's fairly expensive. There's not a really inexpensive way to do a full assessment.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue that I think we're noticing now, at least as part of the Dallas IDA. We'll get a lot of calls because we have an outreach, like a hotline where folks can call in with their questions, their concerns, and if they need a resource for something. And a lot of our calls are adults that are looking for further support for accommodations in the workplace, even though they don't have an identification for dyslexia, or they're looking to get an identification or an evaluation. And we're finding that it's expensive. It's a couple thousand, probably minimum. And so I don't know if that's a resource that will change, where more affordable evaluations could become available one day. That would be my hope, or that like a company would support that. But I would just say in the meantime, it would probably just help to do a screener yourself from the International Dyslexia Association website, and then maybe just like a letter documenting the struggles you have or something like that, if it's like you're trying to get accommodations from an employer. But it's tough. It really is. And I empathize with adults, because if you weren't identified in school, in that K through 12 system in public schools, it's expensive to look into it as an adult now.
And the thing is, if you want accommodations at work, typically they're gonna require a professional assessment.
Right.
They
Yeah.
typically are not gonna take a letter of like, these are my symptoms, so I think I have dyslexia. I'm like, yeah, employer's gonna be like, no, you need to get a full screening, and
Right,
that's
and then the issue too is, if it's a situation like that, a lot of times they want a medical diagnosis, and like for example, I do evaluations, but I'm not an MD, so I can't give a medical diagnosis. I can give a recommendation or an identification, a recommendation for an identification of dyslexia, but that medical diagnosis has to come from an MD, and that's not necessarily what doctors specialize in. Even if you take your child to the pediatrician, like I have yet to meet a doctor that, I'm sure they're out there here and there, but where they specialize in diagnosing dyslexia or identifying it for children. And so that's where it's really tough. So there's a lot of hurdles to cross for adults that are struggling with these characteristics of dyslexia.
right. And I know there is different types of dyslexia and just different types of learning disabilities in general, because there is dysgraphia.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you say it.
Yep.
Which is in kind of the opposite. It's not reading and writing; it's numbers. And
The dysgraphia is the
yeah,
writing,
or
and then
writing.
dyscalculia is the numbers are
Yeah.
related to the mathematics. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you want to just briefly talk about just the different types of learning disabilities beyond dyslexia.
Yeah, so it can be kind of challenging because with dyslexia, there are a lot of other learning difficulties that can go hand in hand. And we as professionals call those comorbidities, but sounds kind of gruesome, but they just co-occur. So a lot of times the students I work with are not just dealing with the challenge of dyslexia and that reading difficulty, or that spelling difficulty. They could be dealing with dysgraphia, like we mentioned, where it's difficulty for handwriting,
Mhm.
and or they might be dealing with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and some of those symptoms and characteristics overlap too, and so that can be a challenge to identify. Uh, when if it's more than one learning disability, or learning difficulty. And I'm trying to think of some of the other common ones. A lot of times my children will have speech difficulty in their earlier years, and then later on they also get a diagnosis for dyslexia. And so there's just a lot of co-occurrences of different learning difficulties, and that's not an uncommon thing. But I do have parents that are just like, oh my gosh, he's dealing with this and this. What do I do? And they're really freaking out, and it's kind of a normal thing to have a lot of overlap and challenges with different areas.
Right. And so, is there a cure for dyslexia or any of these other types of learning disabilities?
Yeah, so there's no cure per se. It's something that people have to learn to manage and work with. And sometimes there's people, like my mom's probably a great example of being able to somehow manage. She's nearly 70 now, and she's managed her whole life with having the challenge of ADHD and dyslexia, and no remediation, no special tutoring, no therapist or special one-on-one support like that. And she was able to become a 35 year high school Spanish teacher. And, she had a successful career that involved a lot of reading and writing and attention and focus. And she managed it. Other people, will manage the ADHD or something else with medication, but there is no medication to manage dyslexia. And it's just something that could be remediated, where you would receive the therapy. But I think it's just always a work in progress, and it's always a challenge. The best example I have is I recently became a stay-at-home mom. And when I left the workforce, I noticed being out of the workforce and that day-to-day practice of reading and writing and doing all baby things, it has changed me. As it just makes my learning difficulties more obvious to me, because it's just more of a challenge. And so I think kind of working towards the dyslexia, so it's just always going to be there for people. And at times in your life, it might be less of a challenge because maybe you get more support in a school system or from that job you're doing. And then other times, if you're taking a break from the day-to-day practice of reading, writing, spelling, and really working on it, it might be more challenging because you haven't been doing it as often, like in my situation with taking care of a baby at home. So there's no cure for it, but it's something that people learn to cope with and manage. And there's a lot of really, really kind of famous people out there that are dyslexic and so successful. All of the folks that I've worked with, they are just so gifted and unique, because I just like to say that the dyslexic brain it's just kind of on a different level. These children or adults see things in a different way that other learners aren't able to see. And it's their own way. It's not the same for every dyslexic, because they're so unique in a very special way. I would just say they're all gifted, because it's like their brain mapping works differently. So they might have this strength in one area, or let's say it's athleticism or mathematics or something like that, or tactile, and they can put things together and build things, but they struggle with that ability to read and learn to read. And so, it's just, and it can be on a spectrum too. I might have very, very mild dyslexia, while another person might have very severe dyslexia, and that impacts us all in a different way.
Just because you have dyslexia or any other kind of learning disability does not mean that you cannot be successful, and does not mean that you can learn to manage it or
Right.
grow.
Yeah. Because like I said,
you're dumb. I hate that. I hate when people say, oh, you're dyslexia or you have this learning disability and you're dumb. Like, no.
Well, the worst is when kids say it about themselves. And that's why, like, I promise you, dyslexics are just, they have such a unique brain and ability to see things in a different way. It's really interesting. And like, there's just tons of examples of famous dyslexics out there, that I think it's always fun to try and identify with, if that's something you are struggling with as, a dyslexic learner. Start Googling all the famous dyslexics, and you can see, like, wow, look at all these CEOs of these companies, and they're all dyslexic. It's just there, you can have success, whatever success looks like, even if you have that challenge of dyslexia.
Now, I want to touch very, very briefly on the difference between dyslexia and these other learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities.
Sure.
Two very different things. Can you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, so the difference with dyslexia is, like I've kind of outlined, is like you have to have a strength, or it has to be a level of unexpectedness. Your reading ability or your spelling, your decoding ability, your phonological awareness skills. There's a level of unexpectedness where like any of those skills are kind of maybe lower compared to some of your other true abilities, like where your math scores are average or high, maybe even superior. There has to be a difference there. If it's intellectual disability, you're going to be kind of more on par with all of your scores across the board.
And there's going to be a limit to where, kind of like where you learn your learning ability if you have intellectual disability. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Finally, tell us ways that people can find help if they have dyslexia or any other learning disability.
So there's some really good resources out on the website. Like if you're looking for a therapist, alta.org, ALTA, is a good place to find certified academic language therapists who can provide that one-on-one therapy. Typically it's not cheap, but if you're really looking for the remediation and the support, that's where you would start. The International Dyslexia Association also has a catalog or a resource to find CALTs or even CALP, certified academic language practitioners. And there are also just good websites out there, like if you're a parent needing more support, there are parent groups all over called Decoding Dyslexia, I believe it is, where it's these parent organizations that support. Maybe you're having a challenge with your school district about the services for your child, and they're not kind of doing what you've read about or what you'd expect, or there's some challenge that you're having with the district. Decoding Dyslexia is a good tool for parents. There are other good, I'm trying to think of another. There's a nonprofit called Stand Up LD, and that is a great resource for kind of all things learning differences. And it's just standupld.org. And the founder of that is actually a dyslexic himself. And so they will do roundtables, they'll have speakers, they offer events, different resources, but they're one of my favorite pages to go to for kind of fact sheets or definitions about the learning difficulty. If I'm trying to learn more about dyscalculia or dysgraphia, I think it's a great place to direct parents to, or adult dyslexics, to learn more about how to get support in those areas.
Okay, that was my other question. And what about support for adults that either we're not able to get diagnosed, or if they're looking somewhere to get an assessment? What are some resources for them?
For adults, we've mentioned it's a challenge as far as I know. I don't know in your immediate area what resources are specifically available to adults looking for an evaluation, but I would guess
there are none.
I was going to say it's probably slim options. Even here in Dallas, it's just, it's difficult because there's a lot of adults that call our hotline, and they just don't have the funds to pay $2,000 minimum for an evaluation at a doctor's office or through a private practice. And so it's really tough. Like I have this one person who contacted me who's trying to pass her teacher education exams through the state of Texas, but she isn't able to get her accommodations because she doesn't have anything documented about her dyslexia. And so she's just struggling, and she's had to retake these teacher exam assessments over and over and over again. And I think finally she ended up choosing a different career path. But for people like that, I just wish we could offer so much more. And we had a good resource for them to go for an evaluation that, was, a reduced fee at least, or something. So I guess call me, find my email, and we can try to change things and try to get some better resources out there for adults.
And I'll offer, Permian Basin Adult Literacy Center, we don't, offer assessments or anything like that, but we can do some research and help you find somebody. I know that the local university does assessments for adults, but they do charge. Unfortunately, that's just the case right now.
Yeah, but I mean, I think sometimes, being able to go to those adult literacy classes that like Permian Basin offers is really like the best that you can do, because I know we spoke before, kind of some of the curriculum and the programming that you use to support your adult literacy learners does have all of those components that you would hope for in a good dyslexia remediation program. So even if you're not getting that label or that identification, it's still going to help for an adult to attend adult literacy classes, whether they're ESL classes in the community or at Permian Basin. It's going to help and what I would really recommend is just using resources out there that aren't going to be the typical mode of reading. So a lot of my learners do so well, and research shows that it's the same as reading, to use an audio reader, like is it Audible? Is that I think it's the one from Amazon. For kids in K-12 setting, we like to recommend Learning Ally. But just to listen to what you would normally be reading, research shows that it's the same, and you can learn just as much, maybe even more. I have a friend who worked on his MBA, and he's a severe dyslexic, and during his MBA, he would have to scan in all of the pages from the text and listen to them on the audio reader. But the thing is he would be able to get through the work a lot faster because his listening skills are so much better than his reading skills, or than his peers' reading skills even. And so he can listen to tons of stuff super, super fast and absorb all that information and really comprehend. And if he were to be reading, that would be a struggle. So, just using certain accommodations to support it might be your best bet as, an adult struggling with these dyslexic characteristics.
Perfect. Well, Samantha, it was a delight. And dyslexia and these other learning disabilities are such a important topic that needs to be talked about. And we appreciate you coming on and giving us some more information.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting dyslexia awareness during October Dyslexia Awareness Month.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Samantha, for joining us. And we will see everybody next week. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.